My name is David Carrott. I'm here today to talk about how firms can benefit from a common MarkLogic use case, the Universal Data Repository. In this video, we'll discuss data access in a universal repository. Other videos in this series cover topics like creating the universal repository and end-user experience. A key to a universal repository is that it combines data of all kinds, from Word and Excel documents and PDFs, to JSON and XML, to data coming from relational systems, to semantic triples. Being able to access all this data in an integrated whole is a key aspect. In a universal repository, much of the work in making different data types will have been done on ingest, by parsing and extracting metadata from unstructured and semi-structured documents, and by pulling critical fields from relational data. What will be essential to making the data available to users is providing a multi-model approach to data access, and by using semantic ontologies and other triples to tie information together to enhance queries and provide better responses. So that's what we're going to be looking at here. Much of the data coming into a universal repository will look like this slide. This is a complex XML document. Why it looks like this, this is not always usable to your end users. The majority of your end users need to access the data more like this. If they're using Power BI, Tableau, Python-driven machine learning algorithms, they all need data provided them looking like a grid. As we saw in another video, with MarkLogic, any data that has been modeled with the Data Hub is immediately available as a SQL view. Also, with MarkLogic's template-driven extraction, SQL views can be defined on any structured or unstructured data. So we'll show an example of this later on. Once the data is loaded, the firm needs to be able to query it and perform analytics with it. This can be handled by enhancing the repository with semantic ontologies, as can be seen from the example on the screen. So suppose a user wants to find all the records on bond and high yield. In most systems, just entering those terms will only provide a fraction of what's really available on the topic. The reason for that is because content producers don't necessarily think about the data the same way as content users do. So in this case, munis are a kind of a bond. Debt securities are another synonym for a bond. High yield junk and high risk are all different ways of saying the same thing. When you do your query, whether it's a structured query or a free text search, and you just focus on bond and high yield, you'll miss the records indexed against the other terms. MarkLogic integrates structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data with semantic ontologies, which allow it to expand your searches and queries behind the scenes and make it a smart data platform. With MarkLogic, your users don't need to be experts at how your data is categorized and indexed to get value from it. Okay, so MarkLogic has all these powerful data access techniques. It can take data from text, Word documents, Excel, structured data, semi-structured data, and it can turn all your semi-structured and structured data into SQL views. But how do you take the full advantage of the power of MarkLogic? How do you combine semantic ontologies with your SQL data? How do you combine other kinds of free text searching and other techniques with that in a way that's usable by your users without them having to become experts at all this technology? And the way you do that is with MarkLogic's Optic API. So it's a single API that can handle your documents, your rows, your graph information, and it can handle any kind of index and then expose all of that data as a SQL view through ODBC to any application that needs it. So it can take data from the views that already exist, from your triples, from searches you've done, from existing indexes, from SQL commands, and from Sparkle, and all of these different kind of queries can be combined into a single whole. So you can do aggregates and groupings, you can do joins between documents, you can do joins between SQL rows, you can do unions and intersections between different data sets. All the things that you would do in SQL, you can do in Optic. But again, you're not just working with SQL data, you're also working with document data and semantic data. And so how do you construct the queries? The same way as you would in any other approach. You create selects and order bys and joins, and then you output the data when you're done. Okay, so let's get hands-on. So in this system, we actually already have a large amount of data. So there's already 4,000 different documents of different times, customer information, mortgage information, customer to account information, loan document information. But let's talk about how we start to access that. So as we saw in another video, anytime you use the MarkLogic Data Hub entity services and model entities, anything you model is automatically made available to you as SQL. But in addition to that, we have what's called the template-driven extraction, where you can create templates that describe regularities in your data. And then whenever you register those templates with MarkLogic, that's creating a SQL view of the information. So this is what it looks like. You specify what kind of information does this SQL view apply to, and so you use the MarkLogic idea of a context, a collection, and so this only applies to information that applies to the mortgage collection. And then you come in here and specify what field names. So you have incoming documents, which may be XML or JSON, and you specify what attributes you wish to pull out of those. So account number, which in this case we're calling a string, location, which is a string, loan type, mortgage type, interest rate, which is a decimal in this case, loan to value ratio, which is a decimal, the mortgage amount, which is also a decimal, so an end date, which is a date, how many days late. And so you come through here, and geometry, where you're specifying where the latitude and longitude of where the property is that you own. And so you come through here and specify which columns you're pulling out from the underlying data, and that data is in this case, so we ran through the data harmonization and modeling process in the Data Hub framework. So we've already harmonized possibly multiple data sources which may have inconsistent names and harmonized them. So you would be defining this against an already harmonized, but you don't have to. You can just take raw XML, raw JSON, and create these against that. And then you insert this template into MarkLogic, and once you do that, it kicks off what's basically a re-indexing event. MarkLogic will go through the entire database and create a SQL view of this, and as soon as it's done, your users can now access this data through our ODBC connection. And so if they're using Tableau or Power BI or Python, all of this is accessible to them. And so we already saw an example. We'll probably at the end also show accessing. We're not going to run this here because we already actually defined this in Data Hub framework, so this would be redundant, but you can do it against different kinds of data that you haven't gone through the data modeling process. So now let's talk about, but we have that SQL view we created, and so the data that coming in, as you'll recall, was just a lot of key value pairs basically. So if we come down here and look at what one of those records look like, the data coming in actually just looks like this. It's just name value pairs in effect stored in a document. This looks like XML. And then, but what we've done is taken this and then through our TDE created a single SQL view of that information, and now we can do all these different kinds of SQL queries against it. And then also, this is a more interesting example. Here we have taken, we're doing a Sparkle query. So let's just run it. And so we're running for this social security number, and this is going against triple data, so that one of our data sources, well, we have multiple Sparkle inputs here. We have a relationship information of who's in household with who, and then we also have a lot of information linking different IDs the customer has. And so then this Sparkle query is taking that and then running this query to give you an idea of all of the accounts that exist for a household. So we start with this person and we say, now let's expand that query with this this is going against triples that say this social security number is in a household with this social security number. And so we're expanding the query there. And then we're also using our triples that are talking about which accounts are owned by who. So this has a social security number, but they'll have a different account number. That this social security number will own these two different accounts. And then this one here, the spouse of the person, will have these two accounts. So we just give it a single social security number, and then we use our triples relationships to expand that to get what other accounts that same person has, and then what other accounts that person's spouse has. And so, and again, that this is all happening here inside of a Sparkle command. But the assumption here is our end users don't know Sparkle. That the idea is we have these powerful data access techniques, but we want to make them available to our end users who we're assuming in this case only know SQL. So what we do is we take this same query and then we create a view of that. So now this doesn't actually generate anything because it's creating another view. So we created the TDE view. Now we're creating a SQL view of something called mortgage.household accounts. And so again, it was this exact same query, but now you can query that view this way. So this is running the same query as before, but you're running it as SQL. So you're getting now, so this was, in fact, this is the true query, hard to understand, requiring specialized skills. But because you've taken that with MarkLogic TDE, with MarkLogic Optic API, and put a SQL wrapper around it, now your users can access that same information. And it's really important to keep in mind that we're doing a semantic ontology expansion of the information, that we're accessing our SQL, we're doing a SQL query, but we're going to triples and we're traversing the graph and expanding them. And so that becomes really powerful. And then now that you have this SQL view, you can combine that with all your other SQL views. And so now geospatial, we haven't mentioned that yet here, but the properties they're located someplace. And so now this is a query where we're saying, show me everyone within 250 of this geospatial coordinate. And we want to restrict it to mortgages that are of adjustable rate mortgage type. And then we're combining that with our customer information and our mortgage. So these are SQL views that we created in our other video, that we modeled customer information as a table. We modeled the mortgage information as a table. And again, those were XML files that came in. And when we did our entity modeling, MarkLogic automatically created SQL views of those. And so we're querying those. And then we can join. So now we're joining the customer information, and we can do the queries of show me loan to value ratio of 80, end date greater than this, and run our results. So here we are. This is true multi-model. We're making everything easily accessible to our end users. But this, we haven't actually projected this as a SQL view yet. We're running searches that combine those. And then the DSL, I'll just run through this quick. This is just a specialized approach where the idea is that we're restricting ourselves to a part of JavaScript that's easy for human beings to understand. So you can take that for what you want. but this is to make it the developer skill level that can be a little bit less. But so we're doing joins on our mortgage table, on our customer information table, and we're combining this with our Sparkle query that we, it's owns. This is going against triples and restricting it to triples that actually have that within it. And so we're pulling all this information out there and then creating, this output at the bottom. And so those are the techniques. So basically the idea is that your end users only need to know SQL, and we'll show you, we showed it on our first video in this series, but we'll show it again in a second. But any program that can pull up, make a connection through ODBC can have the full power of MarkLogic, that they can be combining all of these different data access techniques. They can be combining semantic ontologies, they can be providing SQL and everything else, and the geospatial, and then pull it all into one place and access it with only a knowledge of SQL. So what do your users have to do to access the work we've just done? So we ran that, and everything we did as we created when we did the data modeling with Data Hub Framework, that was automatically saved as a SQL query inside of MarkLogic. We used the Optic API to create other SQL views, and they're automatically stored with MarkLogic. And what happens is that if you just set up your MarkLogic ODBC connection, you tell it to go against the data. So in this case, the Data Hub Framework by default uses Data Hub Final. So you point it at that, you go to the appropriate port, you give it the username and password to connect, and now you have the full access to everything that we did. And then you can go to Tableau, Power BI, and Python and run those same queries that we were running in the Query Console inside of MarkLogic from those applications. So what does the end user see? So here we are in Tableau. Never seen MarkLogic, but you tell your users they want to make a connection to MarkLogic, and you give it the password. And there they are. So all of the different things that we created using either the Data Hub Framework or the Optic API are now available. And so these are the schema names. So if we come into mortgage, we have 3 subsets. So let's look at like household accounts. That was, as you'll recall, a Sparkle query that we projected out to SQL. So now you have it and you can do what you want to do. And you can pull out your mortgage information and link those if you want. But so I'm not going to get into that here. We actually showed you what the end user experience looks like. But once you have this, all of the functionality of either the Data Hub Framework and the Optic API are available to you in SQL form, combining all of the capabilities of MarkLogic, and all your end users need is to be able to handle these SQL schemas.